Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives, and today we're going to be continuing our discussion on the third Spider-Verse miniseries as we take a look at Spider-Verse Volume 3, Number 3. So of course, where is Miles going now on his merry trip through the Spider-Verse? Well, it's time we check back in with one Penny Parker, aka Spider. And, well, the comic actually opens with Miles and her swinging through her world's version of New York. What's going on is that they've kind of received a distress signal, specifically from Daredevil. Somehow, in some way, he has been mortally wounded and requires aid, and so Miles and Penny are the ones that are going there to, well, help him out. Unfortunately, though, this is a trap. Yeah, they make that clear very quickly. Basically, as Penny and Miles are swinging through New York, something ends up shooting at them and ends up hitting Penny. Thankfully, Miles and Penny are left unharmed, but they don't see where the source of this was, with Miles even asking Penny if they have a Green Goblin here, which she denies. As such, immediately back at HQ, Ben Parker is asking all the tech people in charge of maintaining the spider armor if they saw where that was coming from, but no matter how many scans they can do, they can't seem to find anything, even as Ben asks them to keep looking through stuff. As such, as Miles and Penny end up taking a break, they also start looking for it, but unfortunately Penny also kind of confirms the same thing. While her armor has all these built-in sensor arrays that should be able to detect anything that's going on, the only thing it's detecting is Miles. But the attack didn't come from nowhere, so clearly someone is there with them and is keeping an eye on them. Unfortunately, though, there is confirmation that this is a trap, as someone begins talking to Ben through an encrypted frequency. Of course, Ben has no idea who the hell this is, but this person begins making threatening remarks to the good Mr. Parker, stating that that the left hand is getting ready to strike, and talking about what will happen, and blah blah blah. Put simply, this person very much makes it clear that they are somehow tied to this attack. And, well, eventually this invisible attacker strikes again, as they end up shooting another attack as he ends up shooting something else at Penny and Miles, and it ends up hitting Penny head on, and pretty much disabling the spider armor and causing it to reboot, essentially leaving her dead in the water. However, before that attack happened, someone began taunting Penny. Someone talking about how Penny doesn't seem to recognize them. How apparently this person was put away. How they experienced death and they crawled out of death to face Spider again in battle. And immediately after they disable Penny's armor, this person makes themselves known. It turns out it is an alternate version of a Spider-Man villain. Specifically, Kraven the Hunter, who looks a little different in Penny's universe. While he still has the mustache, his skin is he's now pale with long hair, and instead of wearing a lion head vest, he now has tattoos across his body and seems to be wearing a skirt. Actually, let me see if I can find him here. Yes, there he is. Wait. There he is. Oh, come on! Sorry. Here it is. This is Penny's world's version of Kraven the Hunter. And yeah, it turns out, he has a personal vendetta against Penny, or more specifically, with Spider. It turns out when Penny's dad was the one piloting the suit, basically, he wound up clashing with Kraven, and put simply, the battle ended with him taking Kraven down and pretty much sending him away to the authorities. What the only problem is, reports say that Kraven died in prison. So what is he doing here? However, immediately Uncle Ben, who was looking into Kraven, gets an answer to that as the person on the mysterious frequency begins taunting him again. At which point Ben, through Spider's cameras, is able to get a good look at Kraven, and he realizes he has a red diamond on his forehead. And immediately that starts giving Uncle Ben a clue as to who's behind this. As such, Miles, not wanting Kraven to go after his friend, actually decides to duke it out with the Hunter. And at first, Kraven wants to just ignore Miles completely, because even through the mask, you can tell he's a kid. And Kraven has his own moral standards. He doesn't hunt kids, and he doesn't want to hunt kids. However, Miles is also Spider-Man, and this asshole is targeting his friend. So he pretty much just says, you know, well, this kid's gonna fight you, and so he ends up briefly duking it out with Kraven. With Kraven being more on the defensive, but still kind of outmaneuvering Miles somewhat. As such, while Miles is duking it out with Kraven, Ben is able to start looking more into who's really responsible, and using the Red Diamond as a baseline, he's able to figure out who is actually responsible for this. Specifically, the one behind all this is essentially a government-funded agency called Weapon 6. And the one in charge of Weapon 6 is another supervillain variant. His real name, Nathan Essex, which, if you don't know who that is, which I did not know when I first read the comic, apparently, Nathan Essex is the civilian identity for the supervillain known as Mr. Sinister. Basically, an X-Men villain who's obsessed with enhancing the mutant gene and cloning and all that jazz. Basically, in this reality, Weapon 6 was a competing firm against the Spider program. And when the Spider program wound up getting funded over Weapon 6... Put simply, Mr. Sinister did not take it well, and as a result, he's been spending years essentially plotting his revenge against Spider as a whole. Not just the person piloting the suit, but the organization behind it. And how he's been able to get funding for his research is, put simply, he's been funding supervillains. Yeah, remember back in Edge of Spider-Verse number 5, when Daredevil talked about how Mysterio seemed to have been augmented, but they couldn't figure out who did it? That was most likely Mr. Sinister. And it turns out basically throughout all this, he's been planning an assault on Spider, and, well, Kraven is now his agent. He has souped him up and made him more powerful, the reason why Kraven was able to hide so readily is because he has a new brand of cloaking technology that Mr. Sinister upgraded him with. Essentially, it makes him completely invisible to all senses. Auditory, sensor, everything. So basically, it allows him to essentially blend in perfectly with everything and just avoid detection in all ways. And yeah, Mr. Sinister just wants to kill Penny because, well, like I said, these guys took the funding that he believes he rightfully deserved. So, you know, basic revenge stuff. However, as Miles is duking it out with Kraven, Penny's armor finally gets back up and running, and so she pretty much just tells Miles to get out of here, he's here for me. As such, she gives him a med kit and tells him to go tend to Daredevil, since, well, yeah, he was the bait, he was the bait, he's still injured, and so Miles complies with Penny's demands and goes to help Daredevil, managing to pull out a machine that can take a metal out of his neck, as apparently that's where he was injured, and thus, well, helping Daredevil. He'll still need to go to a hospital later, but ultimately it doesn't matter. But ultimately, he can at least live long enough to make it through the journey. In the meantime, Penny continues duking it out with Kraven, and while Ben keeps telling Penny to get out of there, or at least warn her against all this, Mr. Sinister is still ready to just basically rub in just how readily he can do all this, just to see what will happen when the child of the Spider unit dukes it out with a child of his Weapon 6 unit. Basically, he's just ready to get all this done. But basically, what makes this funny is that as Penny is duking it out, she can hear Uncle Ben and Mr. Sinister arguing through her earpiece, and she just tells them both to shut up and let her win this. However, as she says this, she ends up taking another blast directly from one of Kraven's weapons, which once again disables Penny's spider armor and leaves her helpless. As such, Penny decides to take a gamble, as she ends up opening up the armor and steps out completely unarmed. Of course, Ben and Mr. Sinister think that this is essentially a death sentence, because, you know, this is a supervillain against the kid. Even if Penny has augmented superpowers because of her connection to the Spider inside Spider, ultimately, it still wouldn't be a fair fight. The Spider armor is probably what kept her on an even keel with the guy. So stepping out right now is like pretty much just saying, come kill me. However, once Kraven sees Penny, he holds back. Yeah, it turns out Kraven's been fighting Penny under the impression that she was her dad. And now learning that he's been fighting a child, he hesitates. Which it turns out Penny banks on, because as she begins taunting him, saying, "What? That's right, I'm a child, and you don't hunt children, right? Right?" Well, in Kraven's shock, he failed to notice that Penny had her own hunter on standby. And so as Kraven's reeling from this, something climbs onto his back and grabs at his head. And we soon see that something is Miles as he uncloaks and zaps Kraven with his Venom Blast, knocking him out. So yeah, The day is saved. Like I said, Daredevil has been rescued and needs medical attention, and Penny and Miles are happy that they had each other's backs. It's sweet, although Mr. Sinister is not exactly happy that Kraven was lost. As such, he begins throwing a tantrum and talking about how this isn't the end. He has other agents, ones that can fly, ones that can kill with a touch, ones with metal arms, and blah blah blah. Put simply, Ben just takes his earpiece out and tells them to try and figure out what the secure frequency is so they can block it out. Look into their resources to see how this leak was possible, and thus the comic ends with Ben just slumping down, and then pretty much asking what the hell is he doing, as he pulls out a picture of himself, Penny, and Aunt May. So yeah. But of course, we still got our Spider Sonas at the end of this comic. And for this comic, we have, sorry, I gotta find the exact page, we have Sun Spider, Garden Spider, and the White Widow. Now, Sun Spider you might recognize from a cameo in Spider-Man Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, as she was one of the Spideys in that movie that was chasing Miles. And yes, as you can tell, she's a paraplegic spider person. She wasn't, because, well, she was actually created by a paraplegic person who wanted to have more representation out there. And I can't deny, she does look like a pretty cool spider person. And, well, she will be expanded on later, trust me. But that's for another comic, which, again, that's for another comic. But then you got Garden Spider, who her shtick is basically that she is an alternate version of Peter Parker. Her name is Petunia Parker, and basically alongside her spider powers, she was shrunken down and now does all of her crime fighting in her garden, duking it out with a bunch of insects and living in her old watering can, so that's kind of fun. And then finally we have the White Widow, an aka Venice Doadi. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, I really don't know how this is pronounced. But basically, aside from having the regular spider power, she exists in a future timeline, and also can coat her webs and her gloves with toxins that she secretes from her skin. So, yeah, that's kind of cool. So, basically, yeah, we got Sun Spider, who's a paraplegic spider person, which I think is a pretty cool concept, and I do like her design, and thankfully, I do think for the most part, she is executed well, again, for the most part. We'll talk about her story later. And then, likewise, you have Garden Spider, which I think is a cute concept, nothing too big, but certainly fun. Whereas White Widow, while interesting idea, I think the costume could be better. It kind of just feels like it's a ripoff of Spider-Gwen, so whatever. But, yeah, that's the Spider Sonas. But basically, with that out of the way, what do I think about the comic itself? Again, it's pretty good. This is something I've kind of been liking about all of the Penny Parker Spider stories that we've been seeing in Spider-Verse comics. Basically, every single story that focuses on Penny does have an ongoing plot to it. And I like that we get that the issue that we see in today kind of does kind of revisit plot lines that we saw in both Edge of Spider-Verse #5 and Edge of Spider-Geddon #2. For specifically, 1, we're getting some good character stuff from Ben regarding his guilt with the whole sim system, and then likewise, we actually get an answer to the loose plot thread from Edge of Spider-Verse #5. One of the things that kind of did annoy me about Edge of Spider-Verse #5 was how they really didn't give any definitive answers for what was going on in that comic. They just hinted at the fact that Mysterio was augmented, but they never revealed why. They showed Penny and Daredevil going out and trying to figure it out, but by the end of the comic, there were no real answers, and they just said, we'll keep looking and we'll find him. But the thing is, the only reason that Penny Parker's universe exists is because she's meant to be a new Spidey that was introduced for Spider-Verse. And as a result, we don't really know that her story will ever be picked up. Again, I'm not saying that Edge of Spider-Verse #5 was bad. Like I said, it was an okay comic. It just needed some finality to it. So I like that we're getting more of an answer to that. And like I said, yeah, I do think it's an interesting twist. Basically, the idea is that there is someone working behind the scenes to take Spider down, and the only reason that he's doing it is because, well, he got jilted because the Spider Project got funded over his stuff, which, yeah, that's basic supervillaining right there. But again, it answers the question about where these augmented supervillains have been coming from. He was creating them because, well, they paid him to do it. I like that. Again, it works. And again, it further expands on the whole alternate universe, alternate versions of characters thing. Not only does this comic introduce more alternate versions of Spider-Man villains in Penny's universe, with the introduction of Kraven the Hunter, but it also introduces the Spider version of Mr. Sinister, who in this case is actually just working on the Weapon 6 program, which which also has the codename of Sinestral. So, you know, Mr. Sinister and all that jazz. Whatever. I didn't even realize that he was a Mr. Sinister until I had to look it up, which the red diamond was the big giveaway, because, well, Mr. Sinister has a red diamond on his forehead as well, so With that being said, it's still cool that we not only get that question answered, but we get more expansion on the world as we meet another alternate version of a Spider-Man villain in the form of both Mr. Sinister and Kraven the Hunter. So I do think that's really cool. But going back to how the comic continues revisiting plot threads from previous Spider appearances, we get callbacks to Uncle Ben and basically the role he played in the creation of this world's version of Venom. Because if you remember Edge of Spider-Geddon #2, that story did not have a happy ending. Basically, while Venom was defeated in that story, it wound up costing 2 people's lives. The first was A.D. Brock, who was consumed by the Sim system, and then likewise, the second fatality was Aunt May, who went in to try and save A.D., and then likewise, the Sim system consumed her as well. It's basic, and the thing is, like we saw in that comic, Uncle Ben was the one that was pushing for the Sim system at all, because he was afraid that Penny wouldn't be able to, handle her superheroing duties on her own, and needed the backup. So much so that when she was duking it out with her world, with that version of Venom, he told her to just pull back, but she refused to back down. So, I like that we can see that expanded here. Like, for example, when Mr. Sinister was taunting Ben through the intercoms, at one point, he does throw that in his face. He just tells him, oh, I wouldn't have let anyone fall victim to the Sim system. And then likewise, again, at the end of the comic, we see Uncle Ben just kind of have a little minor moment where he breaks down. Where, after Penny beat Kraven, it basically, he just has a minor moment where he just takes where he just sits down and just thinks, what the hell am I doing? Which I understand. I kind of like the idea that essentially the way he's feeling right now is a combination of guilt for the role he played in his wife's demise, while also wondering if he can even do this job by himself. Because the thing is, while he does love Penny, sadly, unlike most versions of Uncle Ben, he doesn't have as much faith in her as May did. He basically just looks like he cares about her and loves her, but in the back of his mind, it's like he wants to hold on to her, or holds her back, or thinks that she's not good enough. And so likewise, that leads to him doubting her in battle. And we saw that in this comic briefly, when Penny decided to take a gamble and step out of her mech so she could distract Kraven and let Miles go in for the kill, so to speak. And likewise, again, with Mr. Sinister throwing May's death in his face, both of those things come together, and he can just feel the weight of it. Him just wondering, what am I even doing here? Can I even do this job? How can I properly support Penny? And then likewise, combine that with the guilt he feels over what happened to May, of course he would probably just have a moment where he's like, I need a break. I just need to sit down. I like that. It's good character drama. Again, it's not a lot in the comic, but it's nice that we still get that revisited. So I like that there is still continuity between this story and the other two Penny Parker appearances. So I do dig that. Likewise, though, the rest of the comic is genuinely a lot of fun. It's mostly action throughout the story, as basically what the plotline of this comic boils down to is that Penny and Miles are duking it out with this world's version of Kraven the Hunter, and that's really all you need. We got a clever setup with having Kraven lure them in by injuring Daredevil. Then likewise, we actually get some really cool coordination between Penny and Miles as they cover for one another and work together, and which I think is really cool. We get some legitimately nice spider action as both Miles and Penny duke it out with Kraven. And the way they take Kraven out is genuinely really cool, with Penny allowing herself to be bait and just banking on the fact that Kraven would be so shocked that he's hunting a child that he wouldn't notice that Miles would come in and zap him. It's, again, really smart, and I dig it. So, yeah, on the whole, the comic itself is honestly a lot of fun, and is just a pretty good comic overall. Like I said, I like that we get more expansion on Penny's world with the introduction of Kraven the Hunter and Mr. Sinister. I like that the reveal of Mr. Sinister actually wraps up one of the loose plot threads from Edge of Spider-Verse #5. I like that we get some revisiting. I like that we revisit the drama that was created in Edge of Spider-Geddon #2, with having Ben still dealing with the guilt of what happened to May, as well as him kind of having briefly questioning what he's doing, and of course, it's still some fun action as we see Miles and Penny working together to take Kraven down and coordinating each other really well. So on the whole, pretty good comic and enjoyable. So yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. I thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I hope to see you on Thursday when we check back in with Miles and his journey through the multiverse. I think it's time he visits the Old West as he meets with old Ponderosa Parker, aka the Web Slinger. So till then, hope you have a good Tuesday night, and take care.